I didn't really expect to be reviewing an LG G7 this year. Back in January we all thought this phone was dead, killed off by a change in management at LG. Turns out, nope, the new flagship just needed a little longer in the oven. So now that it's actually ready, was it worth the wait? Well, mostly yeah. The LG G7 ThinQ, to give it its full name, isn't the most exciting phone of 2018, but it is a great little all-rounder that I've enjoyed using a lot more than I expected. I'm Alex from Android Central, and this is our full review of the LG G7. So the G7 looks sharp and well built, but externally this is not a phone that really rocks the boat. Design-wise, LG's playing it relatively safe, with an aesthetic that combines the looks of the V30 and the G6. And okay, maybe a certain other phone as well. After going on a 2-year bender with craziness like the G Flex 2, G5 and V10, LG's recent design sobriety has mostly been a good thing. There's nothing too wild going on in the design department with the G7, but the metal and glass combo is pleasant to the eyes and the hand. Of course, the new problem for LG is how to stand out when it's producing this kind of phone, because it's 2018 and absolutely everyone is making this kind of phone. LG's answer is threefold. First, an impressive wide-angle camera. Second, a roaring boombox speaker system to complement the proven quad DAC. And finally, because this is a ThinQ phone, there's an artificial intelligence angle as well, which is mostly forgettable. Instead of getting high on AI, I've been enjoying the G7 because it gives me a smallish phone with great audio and a wide-angle camera experience I still can't get anywhere else. The size is perfect for one-handed use, and the sharp chamfers and thicker sidewalls make for an easier grip than similarly sized Samsung phones. LG's colour options are a little dull, but at least there's some variety alongside the inevitable boring greys and blacks. I've been using the Moroccan blue and raspberry rose hues, which add a splash of colour while still looking quite reserved in the grand scheme of things. The rear of the phone lacks any kind of oleophobic coating, however, which makes it easier to grip onto at the cost of being a total fingerprint magnet. The aluminium sidewalls have a similar gloss to them, but they aren't anywhere near as greasy. Before we go any further, let's acknowledge the presence of a screen notch. It's there, it's not a huge deal. LG calls the display cutout a new second screen, which is both incorrect and weird, because unlike the V series, you can't do anything useful with it, unless you count changing it to a fancy rainbow pattern or whatever. Let's talk about the rest of the screen for a sec. LG's super tall 6.1-inch 19.5x9 2K LCD panel is a marked improvement from the V30's relatively dim P-OLED, and the run-of-the-mill LCD used on the G6 as well, with better looking colours than both previous phones. And I appreciate how the taller aspect ratio gives me better information density in many apps. It's also an RGBW panel with an extra white subpixel for extra brightness. The backlight can go all the way up to 1000 nits in its boosted brightness mode, but weirdly you need to enable this manually. It won't trigger by itself in very bright daylight like it does on Samsung phones. The rest of the spec sheet is standard 2018 flagship stuff, with a Snapdragon 845 processor, plus 4GB of RAM and 64GB of storage in most markets, plus microSD, and it's water resistant too, rated IP68. The one number that might jump out at you is the 3000 mAh battery, which numerically is on the low side compared to the competition. Quick side note, before getting a final retail G7, LG gave us a pre-production device to play with for a few weeks running pre-release software. This preview device had pretty bad battery life, and I didn't expect a huge difference in the retail version. But I was wrong. The production G7 manages fantastic longevity from a relatively small battery. I'd regularly get around 17 to 18 hours per charge with 4.5 to 5 hours of screen on time. That's more than I reliably get from the Galaxy S9 Plus and not far off the Pixel 2 XL. Plus you get Quick Charge 4 support for faster charging, though the bundle plug does only support Quick Charge 3. For easier opportunistic top-ups though, LG finally includes Qi wireless charging in all G7 models. Bottom line, between the pretty strong battery life and the plentiful refill options, that I've never had to worry about battery life on this phone. A lot of phones have powerful speakers, but the G7 takes a step beyond that, bringing features that'll please audiophiles, as well as the rest of us who just want our music to sound great and our podcast to sound loud and clear. The fact that there's still a headphone jack at all is noteworthy, but LG also includes its Quad DAC, which we've seen in a few generations of LG phones now, to put more power behind that headphone port. What's really new this time around is that the same engineering attention has been given to the G7's built-in speaker system. The new boombox setup is the loudest and best sounding smartphone speaker I've ever used, with sound that's full and bassy and not just loud and scratchy like a lot of phones at high volume levels. Sometimes I take a small Bluetooth speaker with me when I travel for podcasts and the like, but with the G7 I really don't need to. For wired audio, the Quad DAC hasn't changed since we last saw it in the V30, but it is worth quickly revisiting here. Combined with a good set of studio headphones or even the pretty great set of earbuds LG includes in the box, it's the sort of thing that can ruin you for music on most other phones. Plus there is a lot of fine-tuning you can do in the software settings to get things sounding just right. So what about the rest of LG's software? Well, it looks a little different to the company's 2017 loadout, but it hasn't changed dramatically. Mainly, we're looking at visual tweaks to the icons to make them look more uniform, as well as some widget changes that make things look a little bit more like a Samsung phone. Nothing wrong with that. I've no real issues with the way the G7 software looks and feels. It would have been nice to get Android 8.1 on here as opposed to the older 8.0, but that's not the end of the world. Performance has been fine overall as well. 4GB of RAM mostly gets the job done still, although I would have preferred the extra breathing space that you get from 6GB when you're multitasking. I'm more concerned about a few smaller usability issues I've run into. See, with a phone this tall, reaching up the top of the screen to pull down the notification shade can be tricky. Yet the very common swipe down gesture on the fingerprint scanner used by many other Android phones isn't supported here. And at the same time, LG's MiniView one-handed mode is unreliable and clunky. Because this is a ThinQ phone, LG's gone to great lengths to build out AI features in the software. Plus you've got the Smart ThinQ app preloaded for other LG appliances that you might own. But outside of the camera, most of the AI stuff is half-baked and uninteresting. The Smart Built-in panel is mostly useless and simply reframes automation features, many of which have been around since the LG G3 back in 2014. But hey, we do at least have a Google Assistant key though, which is more useful and less annoying than Samsung's Bixby key, because it's located further away from the volume rocker, and of course because it launches Google Assistant and not Bixby. You can tap it once to launch Google Assistant or hold it down for a walkie-talkie mode. A double tap launches you into Google Lens. Unfortunately though, Lens is often slower to launch and more buggy on the G7 than it is on the Pixel 2 XL, despite its faster processor. The Assistant key isn't a huge deal, it's moderately useful, but it's not something I miss when I'm using another phone. And it's still annoying that while you can disable it, you can't remap it to do other things. The camera setup of the LG G7 gives us an odd half-step upgrade from last year's V30 cameras. The front camera and wide-angle cameras have both gotten much-needed upgrades, and that's great. The main camera has not, and that's a big competitive disadvantage for this phone. So around the back, the G7 sticks with the same main camera as the V30, a 16-megapixel sensor with 1 micron pixels behind an f1.6 lens with optical stabilization. The wide camera this time is the same 16-megapixel sensor as the main, Sony's IMX351, behind an f1.9 lens but with no OIS. The wide-angle camera has been reduced to 107 degrees though, down from the V30's 120. It's not ideal, but I think that's a fair trade-off given the improvement in image quality we're seeing from the new wide camera. The wide camera is still one of the most enjoyable things about using an LG phone, letting you capture dramatic looking scenes that aren't quite like any other smartphone photo. And at the same time, I appreciate the much improved selfie camera on the G7, which is now an 8 megapixel unit. On the other hand though, the main camera has not kept pace with the competition. It's not a bad camera, just an okay camera, considering this is a $750 phone. Even with a faster Snapdragon 845 processor, the main shooter can't compete with the likes of the Galaxy S9, the Huawei P20, or the Pixel 2. Dynamic range isn't as good as these phones, nor is low-light photography, even with LG's new Super Bright mode. This is a new mode that we first saw on the V30S that uses pixel binning to get a brighter 4-megapixel image out of the 16-megapixel sensor. It's the same technique used to awesome effect in the Huawei P20 Pro, but the difference is Huawei uses a 40-megapixel sensor, and LG's 16-megapixel doesn't have the resolution to make this work well. The result often is a lower res image that looks okay on a phone screen but uninspiring once you zoom in. The G7 also inherits the V30S's AI shooting modes in AI Cam, which I've enjoyed using more through playing with a neat little word cloud that you get here than through the photos it actually takes. I assume LG's AI is doing something to tune photos according to where I am and what I'm shooting, but more often than not, pictures taken in AI Cam just look different and not necessarily better. And to top it off, LG's camera app is also pretty slow switching between the wide camera and the main camera, and the app itself just isn't very intuitively designed. LG has a lot of great camera features here, but I think they need beefier camera hardware to come into their own. I'd like to see what super bright mode could do with a bigger sensor. I'd love to have all the things that are great about an LG camera like the wide-angle shooter, without being disappointed when I take a low-light shot with the main camera. Hopefully, upgrades like this will be coming in the V40 later this year. Which leaves us with the question of who should buy the G7 today. This is not really a phone for enthusiasts. At $750 in the US, it's not a phone you should pay full retail price for either. Instead, the G7 makes most sense as an on-contract buy for someone who just wants a decent, smallish phone with an emphasis on audio and some neat camera features to play around with. I've enjoyed using the G7, and I'm glad LG didn't just cancel it as was rumoured back in January, but personally, I'm willing to wait and see what LG's cooking up for the fall. Perhaps the V40 will manage to excite me in ways the G7 just doesn't quite manage. That's it for now. Check out AndroidCentral.com for our full written review and subscribe to us here on YouTube so you don't miss our future reviews. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.